Installation of a Threadripper into a socket TR4 for AMD is different from any other socket I've seen before. Let me show you how this is done. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of removing this heatsink and the Threadripper CPU that's underneath it in the AMD socket TR4. First thing I want to do is plug in my static strap to a piece of metal on the computer case. I'm going to plug it in here out of the way, just so my strap hopefully doesn't get in the way. Let me show you the tools we're going to be using today. We've got a Torx head screwdriver. This actually came with the Threadripper CPU, so it works really nice. And then we've got an Allen head, and on the end here, it's got an articulated little ball, so when I put it into the screw to take the heatsink off, I can kind of angle it a little bit. So that helps out. Let me get this out of the way. Now, before I start, I've got my static strap in. I'm going to unplug the computer. The computer was turned off, but you always want to unplug if for no other reason than safety. And I'm going to start out by unscrewing these 4 screws. You can see 2 of them in the camera shot. Okay, I've got that one. Come here and get this one. So this is real nice with that little ball on the end because it lets me get at a much more convenient angle to release the heatsink. Now this heatsink I really like because the screws are not underneath the fans. A lot of these high-end heat sinks like this, you have to remove these fans, you have to remove these clips to get the fan out of the way to be able to access the screws to remove the heat sink. And that's just an ergonomics thing. It's just a pain in the neck if that's the case. All right, now I've got this free. I'm gonna unplug it from the motherboard, and I've got 2 fans, and you see it's got this nice little Y adapter. So one CPU fan head on the motherboard can power both fans. I'm going to twist the heatsink a little bit to break the heatsink compound free and then lift it up. And you can see the heatsink compound on the back of the heat pipe mechanism of the heatsink. And you can see the CPU with the thermal compound as well. I'm going to set this aside outside the camera shot, not putting it face down because I don't want to smear heatsink compound all over my desk. Now I need my Torx. And if you look on the CPU itself, it says right here, to close, you do the screws in the order of 1, 2, 3. To open, it's going to be 3, 2, 1. So here's screw number 1, here's screw number 2, here's screw number 3. So let's open it. So we're going to start out with screw number 3. And this is a nice little tool because it gives you lots of leverage, but once you get it loose, you can just twist it. Then we're going to go on to screw number 2. Just got to do it in the proper order. 3, 2, 1. All right, we've got that one free. And the pivotal, all-important screw number 1. Now, once screw number 1 is completely free, there's a spring load on the mechanism that's going to bring the CPU cover up out of the way. And there's these 2 blue clips I can pull up on to release the CPU itself. So now there is a track that the CPU actually slides into. So when you get your AMD CPU, you can see it's going to have this track, and on the back it's got pads just like the high-end Intel CPUs. So now to reverse the process, when you get your brand new motherboard, there's going to be a plastic placeholder in here protecting the pins of the socket, which are very fragile. So you'll pull that out, making sure you're in the track. You're going to slide the CPU down. Then I'm going to click it into place, and then I'm going to bring the cover down. Now to close it, I want to do it in the order of 1, 2, 3, but we're going to go back to the old automotive repair adage, which is start them all before you tighten down any. So I'm going to get screw number 1 started just a little bit. Then I'm going to go to screw number 2, get it started just a little bit, and then get through screw number 3 started. Now I've got them all started, making sure they're threading. I'm going to tighten one down all the way. I'm going to come to screw number 2, tighten it down all the way, and go to screw number 3, and tighten it down all the way. Now, with these sockets where you have the pads on the back of the CPU, you either want to leave that protective cover in the CPU socket or leave the CPU in the socket to make sure you protect those pins, because once one of those pins gets bent, you've just made a very expensive piece of modern art out of your motherboard. It's no longer a motherboard. It has died and gone to meet its maker. So we got to put the heatsink back on. But one thing I want you to notice about the heatsink here is 2 of the screws are close together and 2 of the screws are far apart. Same thing here on the motherboard. These 2 screws are the ones that are close together. These 2 are far apart. So we've got to get it in the right orientation, because the overhang of the fans will actually interfere with the memory slots depending on the heatsink you get. So I'm going to drop this down and I'm going to make sure these screws are going in. Let's get that wire out of the way. Going into the holes on the motherboard that they're going to screw into. I've got those 2 in. Let me make sure I've got these 2 in on this side, and then I'm going to go with that same adage. Start them all. So I'm going to give this about a turn and a half, get it started. I'm going to come across to the other side, get this one started. Then I'm going to come back, kind of do it in a lug nut pattern. Get them all started before you tighten any of them down, because if you tighten one corner down, what's going to happen is it's going to rack the heatsink so far to the side that the screw on the other side will not even be able to get started. So there's one screw all the way down. I'm going to come back to the opposite side where I've already started that screw. In fact, I've got all 4 started. Get this one all the way down. While I'm over here, I'll get this one all the way down, and the final screw. So these screws are spring-loaded and they will definitely bottom out. Do not over-tighten. Just get them snug, make sure you've got them all, and for goodness sake, don't forget to plug your fan head back in, because it will overheat if you forget to plug the fan in. All right, so now I got everything back in. That is how you do a socket TR4 with an AMD Threadripper.